In the shadows of the internet, a mask began to rise. Not a single face, not a single voice, but thousands hidden behind one name, anonymous. This is not the story of one hacker. It is the story of an idea born from chaos, pranks, and raw internet culture. An idea that would grow into one of the most recognizable digital movements in history. To understand how it all began, we need to go back. Back to the early 2000s, a time when the internet felt like the Wild West. No rules, no limits, only screens glowing in dark bedrooms around the world. This was the age of forums and image boards, websites where anyone could post anything, no names, no real identities. Just unfiltered thoughts and endless noise. Among these sites, one stood out. 4chan, a chaotic message board filled with memes, jokes, and shocking content. It wasn't polished, it wasn't safe, but it was alive with energy. On 4chan, everyone posted as anonymous, no usernames, no profiles, just one word under every post. Anonymous. At first, it was a joke, a quirk of the site, but soon it became something bigger, a collective identity. A mask people could wear online. If no one knows who you are, if no one can trace your words back to real life, what would you say? What would you do? For many, the answer was simple. You did it for the lulz. That was the culture. The lulz meant doing things purely for amusement. For the thrill of causing chaos, there were no leaders. No sign-up sheets, no rules, anyone could take part. Anyone could claim the name. It began with pranks. Raids on chat rooms. Flooding forums with nonsense. Disrupting online games. Crude, juvenile, and often cruel. But it built something unexpected. Power in numbers. A single troll was easy to ignore, but hundreds, moving together, felt unstoppable. This was the first taste of collective action. And it happened entirely by accident. Imagine being in a chat room. Suddenly, hundreds of users appear at once. Spamming, disrupting, overwhelming everything, the chaos. That was anonymous in its earliest form. At first it was just funny, shocking to others. But as time passed, the jokes evolved. Some began to see potential beyond pranks. What if this swarm could be pointed at something bigger? By 2006, Anonymous was stepping beyond childish games. They started targeting websites just to prove they could, experimenting with early cyber attacks like DDoS, flooding a website with so much traffic it simply collapsed. Still, it was framed as fun, a digital prank. But the world outside was changing, and Anonymous was about to find its first serious target. The spark came in 2008. A video leaked online of Tom Cruise praising the Church of Scientology. The church tried to erase it. They sent takedown notices. They threatened lawsuits. But trying to silence the internet was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Anonymous didn't just laugh. They fought back. This became known as Project Chronology. And it was the turning point. The moment Anonymous went from pranksters to something more. For the first time, they weren't just online. They were on the streets, wearing masks, holding signs, protesting in front of Scientology centers across the world. The mask was the Guy Fawkes mask. The one from the film V for Vendetta. It became their symbol, a face that was no one's, and everyone's. News cameras showed up. Suddenly, Anonymous wasn't just an internet joke. They were a movement. A nameless, leaderless force challenging real-world power. But inside the movement, not everyone agreed on what they were. Some wanted to fight for causes. Some just wanted chaos. Some wanted both. This tension between activism and anarchy would define them for years. By the late 2000s, masks were in the streets. Governments had started to pay attention. And Anonymous had tasted the power of coordinated action. The pranks were fading. The lulz were evolving. And the world was about to see what they could really do. The protests against Scientology marked a shift. For the first time, Anonymous realized they could influence the real world. It wasn't just about crashing websites or spamming forums anymore. It was about power and about how that power could be used. As the cameras rolled and articles spread, the masks became iconic. Crowds of people in cities across the globe wore the same face. A sea of identical masks that said, "We are many." We are one. The world was fascinated. Who were these people? Where did they come from? Were they hackers? Were they activists? Or just kids in masks? The truth was simple. Anonymous wasn't one thing. It was all of those at once. Anyone could join. Anyone could leave. It was a swarm with no queen. A movement without leaders. Scientology was only the beginning. Soon, Anonymous turned their attention elsewhere. Targets shifted from powerful organizations to governments, corporations, and even global issues. One of the earliest large-scale campaigns was Operation Payback. It began in 2010 when movie and music companies tried to shut down piracy websites. Anonymous responded with digital attacks. They launched waves of DDoS assaults, knocking sites offline one by one. But what began as a fight over piracy grew into something much bigger. That same year, WikiLeaks released a massive collection of secret US government cables. The fallout was explosive. Governments tried to silence WikiLeaks by pressuring companies like PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa to cut off donations. Anonymous saw it as censorship, and they struck back. For days, the financial giants faced relentless digital attacks. Websites crashed, systems buckled. The message was clear: if you silence the truth, we will silence you. The scale was unlike anything seen before. Thousands of people downloaded simple tools that let them join the attacks. With one click, anyone could be part of the digital assault. It was collective power at a new level. The media gave it a name: hacktivism. Hackers who used their skills not just for profit or fun, but for political or social causes. And Anonymous became the face of it. But the rise of Anonymous also brought internal divisions. Some members wanted to keep things lighthearted, focused on pranks and jokes. Others were driven by ideology, seeing themselves as digital freedom fighters. And then there were those who wanted chaos for its own sake. These differences created splinter groups. The most famous was Lulz, short for Lulz Security. In 2011, they launched a spree of high-profile hacks. Government websites, corporations, even security firms, no target seemed off-limits. For a time, Lulz dominated headlines. They mocked their victims. They released stolen data. They exposed weaknesses in systems that claimed to be secure. It was chaos wrapped in dark humor. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Law enforcement agencies around the world were starting to close in, and infiltration was inevitable. The FBI managed to flip one of Lulz's most visible members, a hacker known as Sabu. While he appeared to still be leading operations, he was secretly working with authorities. One by one, arrests followed. Key figures in Lulz and Anonymous were unmasked and taken into custody. The crackdown was global. From the United States to the United Kingdom to the Netherlands, members were arrested and charged. Courtrooms filled with stories of young men facing decades in prison. The masks, once symbols of invincibility, suddenly looked fragile. These arrests sparked debate. Were Anonymous members criminals, or were they activists fighting for digital rights? The line was blurry. To governments, they were a threat. To many online, they were heroes. But the truth was never so simple. Anonymous was not a single unified movement. It was a collection of individuals, each with their own motives. Some sought justice, others sought chaos. Some simply wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. The fallout from the arrest shook the collective. Trust was shattered. People feared infiltration. The idea of being one of many suddenly carried real risks. Yet even as the pressure mounted, the idea of Anonymous refused to die. Because Anonymous was never just the people behind the screens. It was a symbol, a banner anyone could raise, a mask anyone could wear. By the mid-2010s, the movement had slowed. Large-scale, coordinated actions became rare. But whenever a global issue flared, the mask would reappear. During the Arab Spring uprisings, Anonymous targeted government websites in Tunisia and Egypt. When ISIS used the internet to spread propaganda, Anonymous launched campaigns to disrupt their networks. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Anonymous declared cyber war on Russian state websites. Each time, the world was reminded that Anonymous was still out there, not as a single group, not as an army, but as an idea anyone could adopt. What began as a prank on an obscure message board had become a global symbol of resistance. An idea that governments feared, an idea that corporations despised, and an idea that ordinary people still found inspiring. Anonymous had no leaders. No headquarters, no membership lists, only a mask and a name, and the reminder that anyone, anywhere could be anonymous. Anonymous had become more than a name. It was a movement that lived in the tension between chaos and purpose. Some called them criminals, others called them digital rebels. But one thing was certain: they were impossible to ignore. By now, governments and corporations had realized the threat. What began as a joke was now powerful enough to disrupt banks, security agencies, and multinational companies. And that kind of power was never going to be left unchecked. The FBI, Interpol, and intelligence agencies around the world started hunting. They monitored forums. They traced IP addresses. They infiltrated chat rooms where Anonymous planned their next moves, and one by one people were caught. A teenager in the UK raided at dawn. A university student in the US charged with cybercrimes. An office worker in the Netherlands arrested for joining attacks with nothing more than his laptop. It became clear that while Anonymous was a faceless idea, the people behind it were very real, and they were vulnerable. The arrests were splashed across headlines. Suddenly, Anonymous wasn't just a mysterious force on the internet. They had names, ages, and faces. Young men, often barely out of their teens, facing decades in prison. Inside the movement, paranoia grew. Who could be trusted? Who was really anonymous? And who was secretly working with the police? The unmasking of Sabu was the most devastating blow. Once a central figure in Lulz, admired for his skill and leadership, he had secretly been cooperating with the FBI. Every chat message, every plan, every operation he was involved in had been fed straight to law enforcement. For many, this betrayal shattered the myth of invulnerability. If someone like Sabu could be flipped, anyone could. But even in the chaos of arrests and betrayals, the spirit of Anonymous refused to vanish. Because Anonymous was never about one person. It was never even about one group. It was about the idea that anyone could rise up, put on the mask, and take action. That idea continued to surface in unpredictable ways. In 2011, Anonymous turned its attention to the Arab Spring. Protesters in Tunisia, Egypt, and across the Middle East were rising against dictators. Governments tried to censor the internet, blocking social media and silencing opposition. Anonymous struck back. They attacked government websites. They spread guides on how to bypass censorship. They gave activists digital tools to keep their voices alive. For many protesters, Anonymous became a shadowy ally. A faceless force in the background, disrupting oppressive regimes and reminding governments that the internet could not be silenced. At the same time, anonymous operations began targeting corporations linked to corruption, greed, and abuse of power. Oil companies, security firms, even child exploitation networks. Their targets shifted constantly, but the pattern was clear. Anonymous was no longer just about jokes. It had become a political weapon, but this weapon had no trigger guard. Anyone could pick it up, and anyone could fire. Sometimes that meant powerful actions against oppressive systems. Other times, it meant chaos without clear purpose. Operations were launched by small groups or even individuals, claiming the anonymous banner for themselves. Some were noble. Some were destructive. Some were simply nonsense. This unpredictability became both Anonymous's strength and its weakness. It meant the movement could never be fully stopped, but it also meant it could never be fully controlled. By the mid-2010s, Anonymous's activity had slowed. The golden age of massive, coordinated attacks was fading. But every time the world assumed they were gone, the mask would reappear. When ISIS began spreading propaganda online, Anonymous declared digital war. They flooded social media accounts. They disrupted recruitment websites. They exposed networks spreading extremist content. When police brutality sparked protests in the United States, Anonymous resurfaced again. Videos appeared online with the familiar robotic voice. The message was clear: corruption would be exposed. In 2020, as demonstrations spread worldwide, Anonymous was once again a name on everyone's lips. And in 2022, as Russian forces invaded Ukraine, Anonymous made headlines by targeting Russian state websites, state TV, and even databases. It was a reminder that even after years of quiet, the movement had not disappeared. It was waiting, watching, and ready to strike when it felt the world needed it. Through all of this, one truth remained. Anonymous was never a fixed group, it was a swarm. A banner. A mask anyone could wear. For governments, this was terrifying. How do you fight something that isn't really an organization? How do you arrest an idea? Anonymous didn't exist on a map. There was no headquarters, no single leader to target. The very thing that made them chaotic also made them resilient. And this resilience carried Anonymous into legend. Even in moments when activity slowed, the mask itself remained powerful. It appeared in protests against Wall Street. It appeared in marches against government corruption. It appeared anywhere people felt powerless and wanted to show defiance. The Guy Fawkes mask, once just a piece of movie merchandise, had become one of the most recognized symbols of protest in the modern world. It represented not just Anonymous, but the very idea of resistance against control. And in that way, Anonymous succeeded in something larger than hacks or raids. They created a story that outlived the individuals behind it, a story that anyone, anywhere, could step into. Anonymous had grown into a paradox. It was feared and admired, mocked and respected. A digital ghost that could vanish for months, only to return louder than before. The media tried to label it, to fit it into something simple, a hacker group, a terrorist threat, a movement for freedom. But none of these descriptions were complete. Anonymous was never one thing, it was all things at once. That unpredictability became its identity. One day, Anonymous could launch attacks on multinational corporations. The next, it could crash a random gaming network for amusement. It could fight for human rights in one moment and plunge into mischief in another. Critics argued that this lack of focus made Anonymous weak. Without leaders or structure, it could never truly achieve lasting change. But supporters saw the opposite. They saw the lack of structure as the very reason Anonymous survived. Cut off one head and another appeared. Arrest one hacker and 10 more rose in their place. This resilience frustrated governments. Operations to hunt down Anonymous members consumed time, money, and manpower. Each arrest made headlines, but the collective remained, because Anonymous was not about who was caught. It was about who remained unseen. Behind the Guy Fawkes mask was a dangerous question. What if power no longer belonged only to governments or corporations? What if a loose network of ordinary people, united only by the internet, could challenge the powerful? For years, that question haunted those in authority. Anonymous was messy. Anonymous was chaotic, but Anonymous was also a glimpse into the future. As the internet became central to everyday life, the influence of digital movements grew. Anonymous showed the world that protests no longer needed streets or signs. They could exist in code, in servers, in the invisible spaces that connect us all. But this digital protest carried risks. Laws written for the offline world suddenly applied to online rebellion. What one person saw as activism, another called cybercrime. The same act that felt like justice to some could mean prison for others. The courts made no distinction. Hackers caught in anonymous operations faced heavy sentences. DDoS attacks were treated as serious crimes. Data breaches carried life-changing consequences. Some paid the price. Long prison terms, lives derailed, families broken. But even as the legal system punished individuals, the idea survived. The mask survived. And the mask spread. It spread to protests against economic inequality. The Occupy Wall Street movement adopted it. Crowds filled city squares with identical faces. It was no longer just about hacking. It was about solidarity. A symbol that said, "You cannot silence all of us." The mask appeared in Hong Kong during protests for democracy. It appeared in Europe during marches against corruption. It appeared in Latin America when people demanded justice. What began in online pranks had become a universal emblem of defiance. Anonymous itself was never fully consistent. Some operations fizzled out, some were overhyped, some caused harm they never intended. But the cultural impact remained undeniable. Governments and corporations had to learn a new reality. Control in the digital age was fragile. The internet gave ordinary people a kind of power that had never existed before, and Anonymous was the proof. The most unsettling part was that no one truly knew where Anonymous would strike next. There were no public meetings, no press conferences, just sudden announcements, a video uploaded with a robotic voice, a list of targets, and then action. Sometimes the threats were empty. Other times they shook entire industries, and the randomness was part of the terror. By the late 2010s, anonymous activity slowed once again. The arrests, the betrayals, and the sheer unpredictability had taken a toll. But just when the world assumed it was over, Anonymous reappeared, always in moments of crisis. Always when the world least expected it. The cycle repeated again and again. Moments of silence followed by sudden eruptions. Moments when people wondered if Anonymous had vanished for good, only to see the mask staring back at them from a new video. Anonymous was never gone. It was waiting, lurking in the background of the internet. Not as a single group of hackers, but as an idea that anyone could step into. And that idea was bigger than arrests, bigger than governments, bigger than any one person. Because you cannot arrest a mask, you cannot silence an idea. Anonymous had always thrived in the shadows, but shadows are never empty. They are filled with whispers, movements, and things that slip past the eye. For Anonymous, that was the perfect home. What made the collective so enduring was not its hacks or its headlines. It was the mythology, the mystery. The sense that somewhere someone was plotting in the dark with only a mask and a laptop. That was more powerful than any one attack. Even today, no one can say exactly what Anonymous is. Is it hundreds of people? Thousands? Or just a handful, pretending to be a crowd? The truth has never mattered as much as the story. Because the story is what keeps Anonymous alive. The story of nameless individuals united by nothing more than an internet connection and an idea. The story that anyone, anywhere, could join. The story that power could be challenged, no matter how untouchable it seemed. The internet gave birth to Anonymous, but it also gave the mask its meaning. It gave people a way to organize without leaders, to resist without armies, to show strength without names. And in that sense, Anonymous was bigger than itself. It represented a new kind of power, not the power of wealth, not the power of governments, but the power of collective belief. Every time the mask appeared in protests, in videos, in digital attacks, it reminded the world of one thing. Ideas are contagious, and ideas are harder to kill than people. For all the arrests, for all the infiltrations, for all the stories of betrayal, Anonymous never truly disappeared. Because Anonymous was never meant to be permanent in the way organizations are. It was meant to be permanent in the way legends are. It lived in the imagination. It lived in the fear of those who controlled too much. It lived in the hope of those who had too little. The mask became the bridge. A connection between the digital and the physical. Between the hacker in a dimly lit room and the protester in the street. Between the chaos of code and the clarity of defiance. Some will say Anonymous accomplished little. That hacks and leaks faded with the news cycle. That the chaos of the movement weakened its impact. And in some ways that is true. But Anonymous was never about building a new system. It was about reminding the world that no system is untouchable. It was about shaking the walls, even if only for a moment. About forcing the powerful to remember that power is fragile. The real legacy of Anonymous isn't in the hacks. It's in the feeling it left behind. The feeling that resistance was possible. That no matter how controlled, censored, or monitored the world became, there was always a mask waiting in the dark. And that feeling outlives the headlines. It outlives the arrests. It outlives the rise and fall of operations. Because as long as the mask exists, Anonymous exists. As long as people believe in the story continues. In the end, Anonymous is not about hackers. It is not about computers. It is not about chaos. It is about the power of an idea. An idea that anyone can rise, faceless and nameless, and still be heard. An idea that the internet, for all its flaws, is still a place where authority can be challenged. An idea that resistance does not need leaders or armies or nations. It only needs people willing to say, enough. And so the legend lives on, in every protest where the mask appears, In every forum where a new hacker whispers plans, in every corner of the world where someone feels powerless yet remembers the image of a smiling face with hollow eyes, Anonymous may fade again. It may vanish for years at a time, but history has shown that it never vanishes forever because legends don't die. They wait, they sleep, and when the world least expects it, they return. The mask is still out there, the story is still alive, and somewhere someone is preparing the next move, because Anonymous was never just a group, it was never just a moment. It was a reminder that power belongs not only to the few, but to the many. That control can be resisted, that no one is ever truly untouchable, and whether you see them as criminals, heroes, or something in between, one thing is undeniable. Anonymous changed the way we see power in the digital age. And perhaps the most haunting part is this: Anonymous was never finished.